sausage, tenderloin bacon, green ham and eggs.
Hey everyone, thank you for having me. I'm so glad to be here today. Today we'll be talking about FM ham, and FM ham stands for Headless Authorization Module, and it is something that has been built not by me, by someone else, by Charles Delph, who is actually with us today. So that's pretty interesting. And so as I said, it's about authorization. So what can your users do once they are into your FileMaker system? It is not about authentication, and it is headless in a sense that it's just made up of a couple of custom functions and a couple scripts. So it's really light to deploy in your solution. And what we are going to be looking at today is the UI that I've put together to demo it, because I feel like it makes it easier for me at least to understand and to present the different concepts and the different features that this packs. And so yeah, we'll go on with that. So FM ham at its core is storing the user privileges and the group privileges as a JSON structure, okay? And the native version of ham only supports one level of JSON, if I may say. So JSON keys that do not have dots in them. I've slightly altered this FM ham to allow for the keys to use dots, but aside from that, all the features are the same. So what is exclusive about FM ham? You would ask. I would say, well, it lets you do a couple things that are pretty darn hard to achieve otherwise. So for one thing, it lets you define groups and have those groups inherit privileges from other groups. So you do have to watch out for things like circular references, but other than that, if I'm thinking of conventional privilege sets, I have not been able to achieve inheritance with privilege sets. If we are thinking of something else that FM ham lets you do, it lets you define a user and assign privileges to that user exclusively, not to a group, but to that user. And on top of that, you could take one user and say, well, this user not only belongs to one group, but that user belongs to multiple groups. So that is giving you a ton of flexibility when it comes to how you want to structure your security setup. And there's even more things that it lets you do by evaluating things in between groups for what's the maximum or what is the sum of all those things, or even evaluate things on the fly. So in terms of minimum requirements, FM ham requires using FileMaker 18 at the minimum, because the custom functions are making use of the while function, and that is with FileMaker 18. And it does require a JSON for the definition of all the groups and privileges. And a user needs to belong to at least one group. So your user doesn't need to have user-specific privileges, and it can belong in many groups, but it cannot not belong into a group. It needs to have at least one group. So the sample file we're going to be looking at today is a sample file that was built on the assets file from the FileMaker starter solutions. And why is it I used assets? I used assets because it had a table for things that we can use as users, but it also had a table for employees, and that was close enough for me in terms of tying that to user accounts. Okay, and so we're not really going to look at anything happening into vendors. And as you will see with the UI that I've put together, the employee screens are going to be used to manage both the employees and the groups. I didn't build a UI for the group definition itself, but someone who would like to do that is free to do so. So let's have a quick look at our employees here. So at the bottom of this screen, I've put a Venn diagram. And this Venn diagram is just an image. It's not tied to anything that happens into the file, but it's a diagram to expose a bit of the kind of complexity we can be dealing with when we are talking about security and group privileges and user privileges. So basically, when we think of a Venn diagram, oftentimes we think of like those three circles that are all having the same dimensions, the same overlaps, very symmetrical by nature. This one is a bit different. There are groups that do not overlap at all. There are some groups that have multiple overlaps. And if we look at the different intersections, there's about 14 of them. So if we were to say, let's implement this as FileMaker privilege sets, then we would need to roll out 14 different privilege sets. And if we have privileges that belong to, let's say, the AC intersection, then when we are editing the privileges in there, we'd have to remain mindful about, oh, if I'm adding this to AC, should I be also adding it to A? Should I also be adding it to C? Or if I remove it, should I also remove it from A? Should I also remove it from C? And so on and so on. So, and this is just overlapping two groups. As you have even more overlaps, then you have even more of those different decisions to take into account. So, FMHAM can really simplify all this, and we'll see how you can get there. Okay, so let's have a quick look at our actual users. If we see Julie here, so Julie, she's our admin, okay, and the user record is shaped this way where in the middle we have the account name and the account privileges. So anything that I want to assign exclusively to Julie, I would pick from the list down here. And on the right-hand side, I have the group that Julie belongs to. So I can change that group, but I can also add privileges to this group. So if I'm adding things to the portal that's on the right-hand side, I'm adding those privileges to the group for however many users belong to that group. Okay, and as a group, we see that administrators are also inheriting privileges from buyers and sales staff. Those are two different groups that we're going to look at soon. And for a given group, we said it's possible to have other groups that our user belongs to, and for each we can decide, okay, is that group going to supersede what happens in my main group, or is the main group going to supersede those other groups? And this is in case of if there are any conflicts in between the definition of those groups, because if there are no conflicts, then we just have the sum of all the privileges. So so Julie is our admin. We see that most of the entries we've got are ending with a 1, okay, to say that privilege has been granted. If I want to explicitly revoke a privilege for someone or for a group, I can set something to 0 like this. So in this case, the not for admin privilege is something that's been granted, I think in one of those two, in one of the buyers and sales staff. And by default, if you are asking FMHAM for a privilege and the privilege is not defined in your user or in your group, then by default it's going to answer with something falsy. It's going to say you don't have the authorization to use that privilege. Okay, and if the same privilege key is present in both the group and the user, whatever is defined at the user level always wins. Okay, so but we see we can also use FMHAM to have things that are not specifically ones or zeros. Okay, so in case of the user privileges, I made a choice to say, okay, I'm going to have preferences, okay, for text size, window dimensions, favorite colors, phone number, whatever you want to put in there, okay, because once you roll out FMHAM, you get to ask FMHAM wherever you're at, okay, tell me this about my user, and it's going to answer you on that. And the other thing that we have here is an asset price limit to say here 10,000 for admin, and that's that. So let's look at our other users. We have Samantha Carter here. She's a buyer, and like I said earlier, we have a price limit of 2,500 here, but she perhaps is a bit more senior, and in any case, we opted to make her price limit $5,050. And if we keep looking at her different staff, we have Eric Turner, and he's part of our sales staff, so he can edit our asset, but he does not have anything that lets him edit the price. And we still have like some user preferences over here. We have Jeffrey. Jeffrey is also a buyer. He's not as senior. Actually, he must be junior because we chose to have him limited to just $1,000 for the asset price limit. And we have Fred, who is belonging to the group called Corporate. We're going to look at that group in details a little bit further into the demonstration. But basically, if we look at the inheritance pattern here, he inherits from groups that are called East, West, and Central. So it's geographic in this case. And lastly, we have Romeo. And Romeo is just a dummy user that I'm using when I need to be browsing any of the groups. So it happens that if I want to change the groups, I need to be logged in as admin. So when I want to peek at the contents of any of the groups, then I use this record, not to mess with the other setup I have in the other user records.
Hey, this is Steve. When you log in as, you're just using that person's model for your session and replacing your current session with your full admin access?
No, so if I relog in as a user, I'm aside from the admin account, which is an admin and full access, the other users are not full access. Does that answer the question?
I was just wondering what you are actually logging out or doing FileMaker's relogin with their account credentials, or you're just using this model, I guess you'd call it, for your account for this time being.
I see. So the login as script is doing a relogin, okay? And in this case, I think all the accounts are pretty straightforward. It's just the account name and no password for all the accounts, just for simplicity's sake. And it does run a script that makes sure to initialize FMHAM to match whatever user we have in the group they belong to. So we're going to dive into that as we are looking into the session. How is the security built, and what do we have under the hood? Sounds good.
Perfect.
All right. So let's just do a couple quick tests. Okay, I said we have Eric, and we say he cannot edit the price, but he can edit the assets. So I'm gonna log in as him. Okay, and I'm going to go to my asset over here, and we'll see that he cannot edit the price. Okay, so if I just say, okay, this is 5, remove 7, what I get over here is a custom dialog. Okay, so just from the fact that this is a custom dialog, we know that this field has a trigger on it. Okay, so we're going to look at that a bit later. And right now the message says that the profile does not allow us to modify the value, okay, no matter what we put in there. And it so happens that on the layout, I also have the exact same field without any script trigger. And if I try to make a change here, what we do have now is not a custom dialog. It is a validation dialog, and it tells us, okay, whatever I hard coded as a validation message in the field definition. Okay, so from there, even if I say okay, I mean the price is going to remain like that, but the record is uncommitted. If I want to commit the record, I cannot get out of there without reverting the record, basically. Okay, so some people will tell me that field validation is not really security, and I'm not necessarily arguing with them on that, but for our demo purposes today, I'd say it's close enough. Okay, so let's have a look at someone else wanting to make an edit on our price. Okay, so we're gonna look at Jeffrey, and if I log in as Jeffrey, go back to the asset. Okay, over here, if I say okay, something like this, well, turns out 9,000 sum is still greater than 1,000, and we get a message. Now, it's not the same message as the one that we had before, okay? But it is a message that lets the user understand what is happening here. And if I was to fix this to say, okay, it's going to be 999, then that goes through. Okay, in the same fashion, if I take the field with the validation and go here, so I get the message that it's still fails the validation, and I get the same message because there's no way we can customize that that message. Okay, so it's not calculated. It's really hard coded in the field definition. But if I do change for a value that is under 1,000, then this goes through, and we're happy with that. So now, what about if I am, say, using the full access account? Okay, so I'm going to log in as Julie, and just to make sure that we are full access, I can access the manage database screen. So if we go to our asset record, over here, what I get to do is come into this field and say, okay, we're going to be talking about 12,900 some, and I still get this because basically the script trigger will fire regardless of if I'm full access or not. You know, it doesn't care. I still need to have something that is compliant. So if I say it is 7,000, then that goes through. Same thing over here. If I want to do this, it's going to go through. But if I want to say it is this much, then that is too much. Okay, and again, validations are being enforced regardless of if you are full access or not. It's about data integrity, you know. So it's always going to apply. So just gonna revert out of that for a second, and we're just gonna have a quick look at what we have in terms of the setup for both the field validation and the field trigger. So our trigger over here is pretty simple. Okay, so it's on validation. We are running a script, and the actual script, if we look at what we have in there, okay, we have FM ham that is coming into play with those two in those two lines by calling a custom function, and what we are calling is simply ham check privilege or ham check priv for asset price edit. Okay, so the way I chose to name my my privileges is as if every time I read them at the end, I read them with is allowed. You know, I just don't write it every time because they would, like 95% of them would have is allowed at the end. So, but you're free to use whatever you want to use as long as it's meaningful for you. So if our first check on being able to edit the price at all goes through, then we're saying, okay, well, I'm glad you're able to edit the price, but is the price within the limit? And then if that goes through, then the edit goes through. If any of it fails, then I mean, what you do with it at that point is up to you. For demo purposes here, we're just showing a custom dialog and then reverting the record. You could totally choose to do something else. So that's really up to you. So, and if we have a quick look at our field validation, okay, for the price, we have a very similar setup. And I'm going to go to validation and look at the calculation. So here we're saying, okay, well, we want to make sure that our price is under the asset price limit, and also make sure that the user can edit the price to start with. So if those conditions are met, the validation is not going to give us any trouble. If any of this fails, then we're going to see the message that is hard-coded over here. So just make sure to choose a message, like if you want to rely on field validation, that will be relevant for whatever content may prompt that, whatever context may prompt that that message to show, be shown to the user.
That validation would also validate if a user were to import a set of records, correct?
Validations will be enforced on import, I think, if you choose to have it be always. If you do it to be only during data entry, then I'm not sure that they will fire during imports. If you also say, okay, I'm going to allow users to override during data entry, then they're going to get a different dialog that pretty much lets them overwrite the dialog altogether, and then whatever entry they wanted to make, they're still free to make. So you have to make sure that you have the configuration that matches your need. But in terms of the validation, like when we think of, okay, are you full access or not full access, and so on and so on, sometimes we think that a full access account can do everything in the system. Well, not necessarily. There are still things that will be applied religiously, even if you're holding the full access account. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. So I guess if you did have a process where they could import a file with assets with numbers that are out of scope, that would have to be considered so that that process could be validated properly.
Yes, if you are running something on import, either you'd want to say, okay, have that validation be enforced always, and then whatever they would import would need to be valid in every single record. The records that would fail the validation would not be imported. And if you are saying only during data entry, then my understanding is every record would be imported regardless of if they fail the validation. And then it would be up to you to say, okay, is there anything in there that is not valid? And keep in mind, not valid for one user doesn't mean it's not valid for another user. As we see here, we have different price ranges that are okay for someone and not okay for someone else. So, but they would both, in the end, have access to the same record. So I'm just going to get out of here real quick, and then I just want to dismiss this for a second. So yeah, one more thing that we can look into is if we go to our employees and we said, I think it's Eric who has asset edit, but Fred who does not have the ability to edit the asset. So what's going to happen if I log in as him and go to my asset and then try to do anything in here? It tells me, again, I get a dialog, and this is not a custom dialog. This is not a validation dialog. This is native FileMaker security, and it tells me that I'm just not allowed to do this. Okay, so let's go have a quick look at what is taking this in charge and making that happen. So if I relog in as Julie and we go have a look at our tables, a couple things. So in just about every table in this demo file, I've created fields that are called record edit is allowed and record delete is allowed, and you can name those fields however you want. It's no big deal, and they are unstored calculations. Okay, so if we look at the unstored calc, it's pretty simple. It's doing a custom function call for ham to check the privilege to asset edit or asset delete in the case of deletion. And if I go look at other tables, like for employees, then I'm just changing the actual privilege that I'm checking against, but the general pattern is pretty straightforward. Okay, so once we have that in place, then if we go and have a look at our security, okay, we have a bunch of users, and we said, well, the admin account is full access for obvious reasons, but everyone else has a single privilege set. They all share the same privilege set. They're not in different privilege sets for sales and for buyers and so on and so on. So I just decided to name the privilege set everyone. And if we go look at that privilege set, so the way it's set up is quite simply saying, okay, we have custom privileges for our fields, okay, and then for assets, we have limited access to records and to deletion for edits and deletion. So if I go look at that calculation, the calculation is quite simply just the field name. Okay, so can I edit this record? Yes or no? Okay. And that makes the setup pretty easy, because then I just go into every single of those dialogues and I copy and I paste my value, and then I forget about getting back in here ever, basically. So just if we look at the deletion, it's pretty much the same thing. It's just using a different field name. Okay. And then we don't have any of that going on for field access, because field access has no calculation that we can play with. It's all like radio buttons and things that are hard coded. For record creation, I'd like for it to have a calculation option, but there is none. So I cannot really tap on FMHAM in this case. And for Vue, you totally can decide to put in there whatever you want to use in terms of calculation. It's just when we're talking about operations that are targeting a number of records at the same time and not just one record at a time. And it's the same for edits and for deletes. If you do replace field contents or delete all records on something where you have record level access turned on, you're going to get a performance hit. Okay, so for view level access, I'm not using the calculation, but if you need to, you can choose to enforce that. So I'm just gonna cancel out, and that makes it so everyone can use pretty much a single privilege set, unless you want to customize other things where calculation cannot be involved. But even if that was the case, you know, what you could do is you could say, okay, I'm just gonna duplicate that privilege set and not have anything to change about the record access being customized, and then you just choose what else you want to change from this privilege set. You know, are people not supposed to be printing and exporting? And in that case, then you'd have that set up, but the rest would remain identical, and that's that. So any questions about how just we're relying on FileMaker's native security to implement those controls in the solution? All right, sounds like
Robert?
there's no.
Go,
Yes.
Go ahead.
Hey, this is Vince. I had a question, and that is like, you know how on login you have run the script on login. It's
Yes,
like
when
a,
I relog in the UI.
yeah. So like when you log into a solution, you're you're running the first script that you log in with. How does that affect hopping around from like, are you re-logging in every time or are you just re-logging in once? I'm a little bit confused about, so like the login
Yes.
process for a user.
Okay, very good. So basically, in this demo file, there are things that are a bit unusual for our file. Even if you were to have a user's table, you know, chances are you would not have a button to have people log in as someone else, or re-log in perhaps even. Okay, so in the case of the demo, I have that button because I need to swap user accounts from just like 1 minute to the next, and things like that. And the login script is running the initialization that would take place normally in your file opening script. Okay, and once FMHAM is initialized, then you're able to rely on the custom functions to say, hey, is this allowed or is this not allowed? Okay, so if we have a very quick look at the scripting, and we can come back into this further in the demo. The login is just doing relogin, and then if we are successful, we run the script that happens on first window open, and then there's just a couple more things happening, running ham setup and closing the window and so on and so on. So
your authentication is still being all your authentication is still being handled by your security model, either FileMaker or external. The permission sets after you're in is where this is being. It's not ersatz because it doesn't look like any kind of like ersatz to me.
It is not ersatz because, like I said, FMHAM is not about authentication. Okay, FMHAM is only about authorization. You can choose to authenticate into the system in whatever way, form, or fashion you fancy. If you want to use like external authentication, you're able to do that. If you want to use the FileMaker native account, you're able to do that. It's going to work either way. So I just want to be sure that I've answered Vince's question, because I'm not sure that
yeah, no,
if my answer was aligned. Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. So so yes, FMHAM is not about the authentication. It's really just about what people can and cannot do once they are authenticated. It does not serve the purpose of making sure the person is who they claim they are. It's not what it's for.
Okay. So, for example, like one of my clients, every other Friday or every 2 Fridays, whatever, a certain person works that Friday. They need access to do a certain task. So we could automate a way for that privilege set to be elevated on that day that they have to work, and all other days they are reduced in their privilege set.
Well, actually, that's a very good segue into the next segment of the presentation. But yes, there are ways that we can achieve what you're describing. Okay. So yeah, we saw things that can happen based on things like the script trigger or validation and the FileMaker security schema. You can tap on FMHAM anywhere you get the calculation dialog. You could rely on it to even use the hide condition on layout objects and say, okay, I want to show this or I want to hide that under some conditions that you've designed in your ham setup, basically. So something that is really nice with ham is, well, we've talked about inheritance, and inheritance is great in a number of situations. Some of them being if you have, say, a vertical solution, okay, where you have different plans for your users or your subscribers or whatever you want to call them, for something like bronze, silver, and gold, or light, pro, and ultimate. So those tiers are often described as everything under plus whatever is in the current plan people are buying. Okay, but there are some scenarios where inheritance is not really going to be enough by itself to let you achieve what you want to achieve. So if you have a setup where you have a group and you say, okay, I'm going to make one group for the juniors and then one group for the seniors of the same department, and one group for the team leads of that department, then yeah, inheritance is going to be pretty much straightforward. But when we were looking at Fred's profile over here, where we said, okay, he's corporate and he oversees what we have in east, west, and central, let's have a quick look at those different groups. Okay, so east, west, and central, they were designed on purpose, having roughly the same privileges, but not the same values for each of those said privileges. Okay, so if I look at east, we have those privileges, and notice the suffix here being present, okay, for underscore max and underscore sum. But if we make abstraction of those suffix for a second, basically we're talking about the asset price limit, we're talking about other stuff and other thing, okay? And the first one is set to 1,000, middle one is set to 2, and other thing set to 13. And if I look at what we have for central, everything is set to 1. And if I look at what is defined in West group, then I have 100, 3, and 1,000. So again, if I come back to Fred and I say, okay, when I'm defining the inheritance stack, okay, and I'm saying stack because the order they're in is relevant. You know, the last one you have at the bottom is going to win over the one that precedes if we're talking about the exact same privileges. Okay, so with one privilege in, I think, East having the asset price limit set to 1,000 and the West having it to 100, you know, there's no way that that Fred would get 1,000, would get the maximum of all the different regions he oversees, okay, just by inheritance, because West is for I think the other thing or other stuff where it is 1,000 and East has 13. So, but Ham, once we've defined everything and we say those privileged keys have the suffix at the end, Ham is going to run its magic and let us know what the sum of it all is. Okay, so if I log in as Fred for 1 minute, and now if I go look at my data viewer, okay, and I'm going to need to look at a couple things and show you where some information is stored. So over there, so if we look at $flat, and $flat, it's a courtesy variable. Okay, it's just it does have the JSON pretty print. Okay, but basically when we are running the ham check priv custom function, that custom function will scan a JSON that contains this, you know, to figure out, are we allowed to do this or that? Okay, so if I check in here for asset price limit, it is set to 1,000. And if I check for other thing, it is set to 1,000. And if I look for other stuff where we had not the max, but the sum, and the three groups had respectively 1, 2, and 3, well, when we add up 1, 2, and 3 together, it comes up to 6. Okay, so this is something, again, that let us really customize the inheritance in ways that are truly awesome. If you have an inheritance pattern that is very straightforward, chances are you're going to be fine without relying on any of those suffixes. But if you have something that is a bit more tricky, you'll need to rely on suffixes like that. And something else, okay. So we see here that I'm saying $flat, it is a courtesy variable. And in terms of the actual storage, okay, that FMHAM is using, okay, for portability reasons, it is coming out of the box with something that relies on a global variable, okay, and that global variable is $ham config. But if you do not want to rely on this for security purposes, and you want to have this be stored in a field that you control the access to, especially wanting to control who gets to write in there and when, you totally can use FMHAM and change it for it to rely on a field that you choose and control. Okay, and something else that you can do to further secure things is as you do the setup, you can use an encryption key. Okay, and in which case this content would be encrypted. You know, for demo purposes, there's no real use for us to be looking at encrypted content. So I'm not going there with this in the demo. But if you want to encrypt it, you're able to do that. Just know that when you are using the ham checkpriv custom function, then for each of your call, you will need to be sending in the encryption key for ham to decrypt the content. And if you have a JSON that is really large, then there could be a performance hit. Okay, and so while we're in here, I'm just gonna create one more watch for us to go look at what I have into globals, because I'm just going to say JSON format elements, okay, and bring this in. So when we saw like earlier the scripting that I had for like on first window open and things like that, basically, like yes, I have records in my file where I have the users and I have the groups and I have what privileges is also what privilege is assigned to all the different groups. So this here is the full dictionary for all the groups. Okay, so what can administrators do? They can do this, this, and that, and they inherit from two other groups, buyers and sales staff. You know, and then oh, what is it that buyers can do? Well, buyers can do those things, and so on and so on. Okay, and in the setup, FMHAM needs this, and it needs the full set of the groups, because if there is inheritance, if you were to only send in the administrator group, then it'd be like, well, you're only giving me part of the solution. I need the full definition to be able to give you the render that says, okay, here is what you can do given your profile and the groups that you belong to and the inheritance that apply. Okay, so I'm actually going to monitor that.
So you're saying, is there an opposite for inheritance? Would it be de-inheritance? So if you had your list stacked in a descending order, then they would be stripped of privileges potentially, correct?
No, there is not that concept in there, not
Okay.
Not that I'm aware of. But if you want to explicitly revoke a privilege from something that you've inherited elsewhere, the thing is in whatever is further in the inheritance or higher up, depending on how you see things. At that level, you set it to what you want to be winning. Right? Like for instance, if I say on the buyers, you know, buyers were granted a privilege that is not for admins, okay, and that is set to 1. And when I said, okay, well, for my administrators, you know, that privilege, even if I'm inheriting from buyers and from sales staff, then in here I'm setting it to 0. I'm basically overriding things I'm inheriting. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. So I guess someone could come up with the reverse concept of inheritance, but it'd be pretty intense to wrap your head around, I think.
I think one thing you could possibly do would be if there's some JavaScript library out there that would render that JSON object and display almost your Venn diagram or what privileges have been added and revoked could be a good way to visualize it.
I see. Perhaps. So and to keep going with what you said on the user who needs to be doing something only on specific days of the week. Okay. Well, over here for Fred, I have something defined with a suffix, but the suffix is not underscore sum, it's not underscore max, it's underscore eval. Okay. And in here, I have something that is simply defined as they get current date times 100. Okay. So we're the 13, so I would expect this to give me 1,300. Okay, so if we go and look at the data viewer again, okay, so if I look at flat over here for rolling credits, okay, we're actually not having the value, we're having the string that was set up in the record, okay, but when we are calling the function ham check priv for rolling credits, it then evaluates that string on the fly, and in this case, it outputs 1,300. So you could design a privilege like this and say, okay, it's going to return 1 on the days that your user need to be able to run that report, and the rest of the time it's going to return 0 because you don't want them to be able to perform that that action. Okay, so and anything you can think of in terms of calculation, like ham is able to give it back to you, and you can also, part of the setup for ham, you can choose if you want the evaluation to happen at runtime when you call the function, or if it is done at initialization, in which case over here in the flat, instead of having the string, it would already be evaluated. It would output 1,300 right there. Okay. So that is a ton of flexibility, and I think there's great things that can be done with that. So the thing to remember about the suffixes is you use them when you define the privilege, but when you are calling for the privilege using the ham check priv custom functions, you do not use the suffix. Okay, so I want to quickly segue into users with multiple groups, because that too can be a lifesaver. And so there are many conditions under which you may want for someone to belong in multiple groups. Sometimes it's people going on vacation and you need someone to substitute for them while they're on vacation. Sometimes it's you have this one new hire, and you're being told, hey, Robert, we have Sam coming in, and he's going to be doing some sales, but he's also going to be helping out with accounting, and then you're like scratching your head, being like, well, I don't really have a privilege set that does both sales and accounting. I have one for sales, one for accounting, and there's no easy way to say, okay, go on and merge those two into a new privilege set, So, but if you were able to assign a user to multiple groups, then you'd be able to do that, and that's what FMHAM lets you do, because as we see on our user record here, we have something where we say, okay, on top of the administrator group, or on top of any group that we have here, we can add a list of groups, not just one. Okay, I can add my group here, so you can list the groups that you want the user to belong to, and you can choose for each if the groups you're adding are superseding the user's main group, or if they are superseded by the user main group. So if we just take one example, for instance, if we're thinking of the a school, okay, where we'd have extreme example, okay, but just for the sake of the example, we have the principal and the janitor, and they're each going on vacation, and they're each going to be filling in for the other while they're away. So if I have here my principal, and my group is principal, and I have to fill in for the janitor, chances are I'd want to come in here and say, okay, I'll be filling in for the janitor, because if there is anything in that group where there's a conflict with what is defined for me as a principal, chances are I'd want my role to win over whatever is defined in the janitor role. Okay, the other way around, if my user here was the janitor, okay, and I'm filling in for the principal, then I'd be coming in here, and I'd be adding the principal, principal, however you want to spell it. Sorry about that. But so you would add the group at this level to make sure that it supersedes the janitor's authorization. Again, if there are any conflicts. If there are no conflicts, then for anything that does not conflict, the user ends up getting both what is in his group and in the additional groups. Okay, and something else that you can do, if we go have a look at the sales staff here for Eric. So Eric, we said, okay, he's in the special bundle ABC group, but he's in there 3 times. And why would I want to add someone in a group 3 times? Well, in this case, if we go look at the bundle, okay, we said, okay, we've got this bundle thing, and it does the sum, and we've granted our friend or this group 25 of whatever this is. It could be credits, it could be whatever you want it to be. So so perhaps you have this vertical solution where you have your plans, when we said bronze, silver, and gold, but it could be that you have something that you're also selling on the side to any of those plans, because your system lets someone, I don't know, send SMS messages, and you're selling that bundle as this one upgrade that people can stack. Okay, so if I log in as Eric and I bring the data viewer again, okay, so what we'll see is that Eric, for his bundle thing, it gives us 75. Okay, so having a user belong to multiple groups can be very, very useful, and it gives you even more flexibility when defining your group, because you can define groups that are more granular and then combine them and have that shape your system. And if you want someone to have more or less groups, or to have groups that are perhaps tied to modules of your system instead of groups, you'd say, okay, well, I'm going to give him this module, that module, and so on and so on. So there's really a bunch of things that you can do like that. And what you saw, I think, is that in all of my groups in this system, what I've done is all the users have a group that supersedes their existing group, and I've called that group disabled features. Okay, so what is it we have in there? If we look at disabled features, we have something where, well, I need to relog in to do that. So if we look at our disabled features, we have something here that is called more stuff, okay, and I've set it to 0. In this case, the eval is not even required, okay. So I can start defining more stuff, adding it into other groups where it's going to be set to 1 in those groups, okay, and not care about that. They're not going to get access to this feature until I quite literally delete this from here, you know, and during that time, I myself can grant myself this more stuff privilege, you know, and set it to 1 because I'm developing on it and I need to run it, or I can grant it to someone else as a individual user or as a group. Maybe there's a developer group that I'm putting together, and or a testers group. So anyway, for any reason you see fit, you can have control on this this feature, and when it's ready for prime time, if you may say, you can choose to then remove this from here, and at that time it'll be active for everyone who needs it, you know.
So you could
the other way around, if
you could actually say, like on your eval, you could say if today is Friday, off, otherwise on.
yes, absolutely, you can do that as well.
Cool.
And for what we have here for new stuff, you know, I chose to have eval on this one. So I said, okay, when is it we're going to have new stuff? We're going to have new stuff. And then I'm saying when the host time temp reaches, well, January 1st of 2100 is perhaps far from now. I hope we get some new stuff before then. But you know, on go live, I'd come once I know when I want it to come live. I'd be coming in here and customizing this to say, yeah, I like on February 7th, that Monday at 9 a.m. I want this to be live for everyone, you know. And at that point, you know, this would turn from evaluating to 0 to evaluating to 1. It just so happens that in this one specific case, the group is no longer wearing a proper name because the feature is not disabled. The feature is what it does. If it evaluates to 1 and this is a group that everyone belongs into, then you're de facto granting this privilege to everyone in the system. But sometimes there are those features that you're rolling out to everyone. So one way or another, you can combine the features of FMHAM to achieve a bunch of things. And really, your imagination is really, I think, the limitation. I'm really having a hard time coming up with things that I'd want to set up that FMHAM couldn't really achieve. The reverse inheritance that I've heard earlier today is perhaps one of the only things that I couldn't relying on FMHAM to implement. But short of that, I'd have to scratch my head to come up with something pretty fancy.
What about
so?
What about multiple files?
Yes, well, it's custom functions, you know. So if you, as long as whatever FMHAM is using to reference the information is set up the way it's expecting, you know, then you're good to go. So if FMHAM is still relying on the global variable that we have in here, as long as you roll that out into those other files and that you are deploying the custom functions in those other files, then you're good to go. If you're saying, okay, I don't want to rely on a global variable, I want to rely on a field instead, well, you just need to be sure that you have an occurrence of the same name, same field name in the other file that you'd be pointing to, and FMHAM is going to be reading from it. So the demo file here is a single file, but you can totally roll this out into a multiple file setup. So I just want to quickly look into, okay, well, what if I want to actually roll this out? What are the different components that I need to roll out into my my solution? So we said there's custom functions and there's some scripting. Okay, so that's the part of the presentation where I really want to give credit where credit is due. So I want to give a big thanks to Charles Delph, who I think is still with us today, for making FMHAM in the first place, for making it available for free on GitHub. Anyone who contributed to the GitHub project, thanks. And also many thanks to Steve SSH for publishing a custom function that I've relied on to allow FMHAM to use dots in the keys. So without those two, none of this would be possible for me. And so yeah, but if we are talking about, okay, what do I need to roll this out into my solution? So if we go look at the custom functions over here, we have what FMHAM uses. Okay, the flattened JSON object is something like that's the custom function from Steve SSH that I'm using to let FMHAM use the dots in the keys. So it's, I think it's used in the utility and maybe in some other of those custom functions. And FM list to JSON array is really just like whenever there is something that is defined as a carriage return delimited list in the UI that I put together. So the group lists for inheritance and the group list for when your user belongs to more than one groups. I use this custom function just to take that list and turn it into a JSON array, but you don't need to have that to run FMHAM per se. So so once you have those custom functions, then basically it's all about doing something that will give you the big blob of JSON for all the privileges of all the groups. And that's what I'm doing on the on first window open. Okay, so basically this is where we set the value for the field that we've looked at earlier. And in terms of the setup, then we're simply looking for any additional authorizations that we need that are exclusive to the user, you know, that we need to tackle on to the group. So this builds the that JSON object, and then we are looking, okay, is my user part of a single group or multiple groups? So if it's a single group, it's going to be just a JSON string. If it's multiple groups, it's going to be a JSON array. And then all the magic happens during the ham config. So ham config is really just that. You are sending in the whole dictionary that says, okay, here are all the groups and all their privileges. Then you are sending in your user, okay, to say, okay, here are the groups that my user belongs to, either a single group or a group array. And here are the user authorizations that are exclusive to my user, okay? And in here you have the options. So when I said things about using encryption, defining if evaluation is going to happen only at the initial setup or at runtime. Things like if there are any defaults that should exist when no initialization has been performed, or things like that. So, and that's all. So after that, we have something in here that takes the result of ham config and makes a JSON format element and loads that into flat. So if, like I said, if you want to change the custom functions because you don't like that something would be using a global variable, so you just need to be looking for $ham config, and swap that out for the field that you say, okay, I'm in charge of that field. I know who can read from it, and more importantly, who can write to it. So that's that. I'm just gonna check quickly if there's anything else that I may be forgetting, but no, I think that's really it. So what sold me onto FMHAM was knowing that the group inheritance was one of the features, and once I put my hands on it and I saw all of the other features that were coming along that were packed in there, I was just thrilled. So I'm really a big fan of the tool. Like I said, I'm glad that Charles released it and put it out there for people to use. And in my case, it's just there. I feel like there's so much in there that without a demo, it can be difficult to relate, to identify. Oh, this I like. This I'm going to shape differently. Sometimes I use the Lego brick analogy. If I see a pile of bricks, I know there's potential. But if I see like a pre-built kit, then I know, here's something I can do, or here's something I can take and then swap out some parts and do this instead. So I hope this is useful for anyone who may be looking to customize their privilege setup, and that's that. If there's any other questions, I'm happy to spend some time on that.
Very cool. Thanks, Robert.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry I was late. Missed the first like 5 to 6 minutes.
Very good, very good. I hope everything went well for you before the meeting.
That picture in my background there. That's where I was when I realized I was supposed to turn around and get back. So
I think going back to Stephen's comment, some visualization of this would be really cool. I don't know, because there's just so much to it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
where's Tony? For visualization.
It's funny because well, Vince, like yourself, I think you're really into visualization, like all of the D3 libraries and those things. So I'd be curious, of course, like for people to be able to visualize what their given privileges are, or what the overall mapping is, and what group can do what. I think it'd be great, because sometimes, like especially when you have inheritance and those things like that, it can get a bit difficult just from one question to say, oh, who can do this? Wait a second, I need to scan all the places, and it's a bit like those calculation, where there's this thread, you see this field, it's defined here, but then it's used into this other calculation, and that channels up into another calculation and another other calculation. So so it's not, it doesn't mean that you can have the answer instantaneously, but overall, in terms of the maintenance, I think using FMHAM can be very useful, even for some small solutions, small deployment, because you never know when it is you're gonna outgrow your existing configuration, and it's always just like one request away from the customer telling you, oh yeah, we have this new hire, and then everything you've put in place is like there's not a right fit for it. So yeah, if anyone comes up with a visualization for a bunch of groups and their respective privileges, that'd be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also curious about the way that naming convention is, like the suffix eval or max or stuff like that. And I'm wondering why maybe just not having an additional parameter instead of attaching it to the attribute itself. Was the decision. So I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, that I don't know if Charles is still with us, because
Yeah, the main reason is flexibility, actually. Just to deal with a couple points, Stephen asked about opposite of inheritance. There's no reason for it, actually, because if you have a group that you want to negate, you just you just inherit that last, and that takes priority. So there's no purpose there. As far as visualization, it is headless, so it's intended to not have a user interface, actually. We've used HAM in, I don't know, maybe 30 or so projects now. And really the privileges are, for the most part, relatively static in the sense of that it's an admin person, not so much an end user, but more of a developer admin who's normally going into systems to make changes, for the most part. Excuse me. But of course you can, as Robert has, you can throw a UI in the front. As far as the suffixes go, like eval, max, and those kinds of things, by having that in line with the actual parameter, it gives the parameter equal parity or equal weight when we're dealing with it in terms of the calculations of things like inheritances and rippling up. If you actually look at the GitHub, there's a JSON object on the page. If you go to the repo, where under the overview section, I'll post a link, and then you'll get a little bit better. I'll just post it in chat here. You'll get a bit better of an idea of really what's happening under the hood without any UI. If you go to that link that I just posted there, you'll see 3 examples of groups. And really and truly, what HAM is effectively doing under the hood, if you're familiar with any JavaScript, it's doing an object assign from privilege to privilege. So you have those 3 privileges sets, or however many you want, and you're doing an object assign, so that way they ripple forward. The difference is that as they ripple forward, we can actually do math on the calculation. So I think somebody mentioned what happens if every other Friday we want to enable a privilege. Under the evaluation section in the GitHub repo, there's a section where edit rooms _ eval, excuse me, and it says get day of the week equals 2. So there you can do any kind of calculation you want. Since it's an inline calculation, that means you can also do SQL queries or execute SQL queries. And therefore, your privilege set can actually be data dependent. So that's another reason for that.
Cool. Thank you, Charles.
And also, I forgot to mention, but if anyone would like to get a copy of this demo file, because I've shown the things where like when Charles pointed to the GitHub, I think he put it in the chat, but I pointed to this in the during the presentation. So that's I think that's the same link. I don't see the chat, but I think it is. And in terms of the file that I demoed today, I don't have it on GitHub, but if someone goes to my website over here and then just goes to the I think let's talk, for the contact page, and just fill out the form to say, hey Robert, I saw the presentation on FMM. I'd like to get a copy of the demo file. I'll be more than happy to send a copy of this file to anyone who might find that helpful.
Well, the other thing that came up, I think somebody asked about multiple files. You actually only have to pass the flattened privilege set. And the flattened privilege set is actually pretty much a list of all your privileges. So in terms of visualization, maybe it's not going to show what groups overlap, but really does it matter what groups overlap? I really want to know if John can open the cash register or not. That's the real question, right? And I need to know that exactly, not be able to deduce anything. So I think the flat privilege set will give you what you need. And that's the only thing that really needs to be passed to the other files for the evaluation, as Robert mentioned. And one of the main reasons for HAM is that it's not FileMaker centric, right? We build primarily web applications. So all we have to do is pass that flattened privilege set to the front end, and then the front end can do the control in terms of UI as to what's enabled, what's disabled, what's visualized, and so on the front. And that gives a lot of flexibility, because now we have a single source of truth and privilege, and any API calls going into FileMaker, whether they're from a front end, from a web application, whether you have some kind of REST interface in front of FileMaker, it doesn't matter. Those can all be centralized now. And that's the real bonus, and that's why it's headless.
Very cool.
How do you guys handle your privileges? How do you work that into systems?
I was going to say, I now use FMM. And it is the case. If anyone wonders if I've used this in a production environment, I did. So it's not just a proof of concept or anything like that. It's really it's
One of
possible.
the neat things you did there, Robert, is not just use it for privileges, because it's really anything that's centric to a certain level or a certain person, which is technically a level. So you had like screen preferences and things like that. Those can actually technically be stored there just the same if you want. You could grab that as some kind of a prefix key, but since you already have this data stored, it's just as easy. And one other thing as well is, if you have a typical structure, for us in our application, our vertical, we have users, and then we have organizations, and then those organizations also have some kind of membership level or some kind of license level. So that's technically 3 levels. A license maybe grants you so many things, so many widgets, and then so the organization purchases that. But the user, at the same time, we have our own staff who also consult. So they have to be able to jump into people's accounts. And if they jump in, if somebody invites us to do development for them, we have to be able to jump into the account, and we need full access without having to hack in the system. So we have, under our own user account, we have some overrides that allow us to do some special privileges that bypass the licensing and things like that. So at each level, you can override those privileges. And that's really, really important, because as Robert showed some examples there, but even just down to the specific user, I want to make Romeo a super admin for a very, very short period of time. I can do that just for him specifically, without diluting or polluting all my other privileges. Does anybody use record level access for things?
Well, for edits and deletes, yes. but for Vue, I shy away from it.
It's pretty dirty down there, right? You feel like you're going right into the basement of FileMaker.
Yeah, I don't know about the dialogues and how they feel. I mean, there's some things I think with custom menus that feel that are not too intuitive in how one would set things up. I think for record level access, it's fairly straightforward, but it can get a bit messy if you have, for instance, your UI is in one file and data in a different file. Then record level access, you know, there are things that when I said you can get a performance hit, like usually I'll set up something where under a very controlled circumstances, I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to call on this script, and this script will be granted full access when it runs, you know. So at that point, the performance penalty is lifted. But if you have a script that is in the UI, you can grant full access to your script all you want. It's never going to escalate that into the data file. So that can require you to jump through a few hoops if you want to achieve something similar. But yeah, so still, like I said, for edits and delete, I'll be happy to implement it. But for view level access, I tend to shy away from that.
Yeah,
And I think
I agree with you there. Our product designer would say, why are they allowed to do that in the first place? Why hasn't there been some kind of user interface construct that stopped them from doing that so that you have to warn them later on? Right. So the warning is like pulling you over and saying you're speeding rather than having a speeding sign. So it's a secondary thing, right?
And also I think the like the typical use case that I see for view level access is like multi-tenancy or something like that. And when we think of what we've got with the data migration tool, I tend to think, well, just replicate your file and have your different tenants have their own files, and then you don't need to be concerned all that much with view level access.
That doesn't really scale too well, though. In fairness, right? Like we have some people who have 300 tenants, and it's just not practical. A multi-tenant file is a viable solution. I think what's better though is a true separation, like what people call a separation model. It's not really a separation model. It's a layout separation model, but a true separation of interface and data. Then a multi-tenant architecture in FileMaker is super easy, like really easy, and it's still secure. If you think about multi-tenancy and you're worried about security, it's like having a Walmart and trying to prevent shoplifting. You can throw cameras up all over the place, hide layouts, hide menus, lock down navigation, do all the things that you want to do, and eventually something's going to get stolen. But it's really hard to steal something from a McDonald's drive-thru. And that's how really applications should be designed from an architecture is have a very small access. And then you can monitor all the traffic, all of the money's going back and forth and the burger's going the other way. And it's, at best you're going to steal some straws or something. And that's about it. So, I personally, anyway, we take that kind of approach because we do make quite a few multi-tenant apps for that purpose around that architecture.
Mm-hmm. Not to say that it's the only use case. I'm sure there could be cases where like distinct employees of the same organization just shouldn't be peeking at each other's record for like record ownership level type of thing and things like that. But
yeah, especially legacy systems. I mean, that's one of the nice things about ham is it's you can use as little as you want. The implementation can be literally as small as one preferences field and two lines of script code, one to invoke it and one to check the privilege, and that's the absolute minimum install. So you can start to use something very, very low level. I totally agree. If you have some legacy system that's already got that in there, that's a perfect way of beefing it up and bringing that security that's way down low, a calculation that you have some convoluted calc that's sitting way down inside record level access, and just putting a keyword in there and bringing the actual calculation to the top. So like you've done earlier.
I'm getting an annotation request from someone. Is there something like is there something that is tied to a question, or should I dismiss this? I think it's from Rodney.
Sorry, it's a mistake. I pressed on the wrong button.
Oh, okay. All good. All good.
Yeah. Sorry, may I request for a sample file? How do I submit it?
I'm sorry, if you want a copy of the demo file, is that it?
Yeah, is that suitable?
Yeah, so if you want a copy of the file, you can go to just go to my website, and once you're there, just fill out the contact form.
Okay.
And say I'd like to get a copy of the FM ham demo file, and then I'll reply with the file that I'll send you.
Okay, that's cool. Thanks very much.
Thank you. All right.
Fantastic.
I don't know how we're.
Presentation.
Thank you very much.